In the heart of West Africa, between 1967 and 1970, a conflict would arise that would shake Nigeria to its core and leave scars that still echo today. This is a story of Biafra, a nation born of survival and consumed by war. Nigeria had just tasted independence in 1960, a land rich in culture, tribes, languages, and oil. But beneath the surface of celebration and hope lay deep ethnic divides. The nation was built like a house of cards. The North, the West, and the East, uneasy neighbors. Political competition was fierce, and trust was fragile. The Igbo people, prominent in education and commerce, dominated many federal positions. This bred silent resentment in parts of the North. Nigeria was free, but not united. On January 15, 1966, Nigeria erupted. Young military officers, mostly Igbo, staged a coup. The Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and key northern leaders were assassinated. Though Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, an Igbo, tried to stabilize the country, distrust grew. To many northerners, this was not just a coup, it was an Igbo takeover. The seeds of a war were planted not in bullets alone, but in fear. Retaliation came swift. In July 1966, northern officers launched a bloody counter-coup. Aguiyi-Ironsi was abducted and killed. In the chaos that followed, over 30,000 Igbos were massacred across the north. Trains and buses returning to the east were filled with blood and broken dreams. Families were torn apart. The east bled in silence. The exodus began, and so did the whispers of Biafra. In the east, one man stood defiant, Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu. Faced with ongoing killings and failed peace talks, he declared the eastern region an independent state, the Republic of Biafra. It was a bold move, a cry for justice. And for the Igbos, it was more than politics. It was survival. But to the Nigerian government, it was treason. Thus, on May 30th, 1967, Biafra was born, and so began a war that would claim over 1 million lives. The Nigerian military, under General Yakubu Gowon, would not let the country split. The federal government launched a police action to reclaim the East. But this was no May protest. It was a beginning of all-out war. Federal troops moved from the north and south. The Biafran army, made up of barely trained civilians and a handful of officers, fought with courage and little else. The world watched, and Biafra braced for what would become one of Africa's darkest chapters. As the war began, Biafra stood isolated. Only a few foreign voices dared to recognize them: Ivory Coast, Tanzania, Gabon, and Zambia. Others remained silent, choosing Nigeria's oil over Biafra's blood. Meanwhile, international arms flowed into both sides. The Cold War powers watched, whispered, and played their games. The war was not just Nigerian, it was global. From celebration to sorrow, from unity to war. The birth of Biafra was soaked in tragedy and pride. But what lay ahead was even darker: starvation, betrayal, and resilience beyond human understanding. In Part 2, we'll witness the horrors of the battlefield, the cries of starving children, and the defiance of a people determined not to disappear. By mid-1967, Nigeria was no longer at peace. The Republic of Biafra had risen in defiance, but it was surrounded militarily, economically, and politically. What followed was not just a civil war. It was a calculated war of attrition, waged not only with bullets, but with hunger. Within weeks of declaring independence, Biafra faced an onslaught. Nigerian troops advanced from the north and west, capturing key border towns. But Biafran forces, many of them young and barely trained, fought back with fierce determination. They launched a daring offensive, Operation Torch, pushing into the Midwestern region, even threatening to march on Lagos. But the tide would turn. As federal troops pushed back, civilians paid the highest price. In the town of Asaba, hundreds of Igbo men and boys were rounded up by Nigerian soldiers, accused of supporting Biafra. They were executed in cold blood. The massacre sent shockwaves across the region, yet little international outrage followed. One by one, Biafran strongholds fell. Enugu, the capital, was captured in October 1967. By 1968, Cities like Port Harcourt and Aba were lost. But the Biafran spirit didn't collapse. The government relocated to Umuahia. The war became mobile, fought in villages, forests, and through propaganda. The Nigerian government imposed a total blockade, cutting off food, medicine, and aid. The ports were closed. Airstrips were bombed. Nothing was allowed in or out of Biafra. A new phase of the war began, the starvation campaign. And its victims were not soldiers, but children. The disease kwashiorkor, a deadly form of malnutrition, became the face of Biafra. Aid workers documented children with vacant eyes and stick-thin limbs. Over 2 million civilians would die, most from starvation. Yet international governments hesitated, afraid to anger oil-rich Nigeria. As food disappeared, Biafra turned to the world. Propaganda films, photographs, and posters flooded Europe and America. The Biafran government framed the blockade as genocide, a David versus Goliath struggle. Churches and NGOs answered the call. But world powers looked away. Officially, most nations recognized Nigeria's sovereignty. But unofficially, France, Israel, and others supported Biafra with arms and covert aid. Not necessarily out of morality, but as a strategic move to weaken British-backed Nigeria. It was a proxy war beneath the surface, with the people caught in between. Desperate to break the blockade, missionaries and international NGOs like the Red Cross and Caritas launched nighttime airlifts. Flying from Sao Tome into makeshift Biafran airstrips, pilots risked being shot down just to deliver bags of rice, powdered milk, and penicillin. Amid the despair, one voice rose each night, that of General Ojukwu. Through crackling radio signals, he spoke of hope, defiance, and survival. To many Biafrans, he became more than a leader. He was a symbol of resistance, even as the walls closed in. By the end of 1969, Biafra was a ghost of itself. Towns were in ruins. Fields were scorched. Aid was dwindling. And still, the fighting continued. But the war could not go on forever. The war was no longer about politics or pride. It was about survival. But in this battle of attrition, it was the innocent who suffered the most. As Biafra bled, the world watched, and history quietly recorded a tragedy too great to ignore. As 1969 waned, the Republic of Biafra was a shadow of its former self. Once filled with fiery dreams of self-determination, it now stood fractured and starving. Enugu had fallen. Umuahia, the last capital, crumbled under Nigerian bombardment. Yet, the spirit of the Biafran people endured. Children with hollow eyes still waved tattered flags. Soldiers barely older than boys guarded checkpoints with rusted rifles. Colonel Ojukwu, once confident, now paced the war room with sleepless eyes. On January 9, 1970, realizing the battle was unwinnable and hoping to avoid total destruction, Ojukwu secretly left for Ivory Coast. His vice president, Philip Effiong, assumed leadership, tasked with a final mission to bring peace without annihilation. On January 12, 1970, Major General Philip Effiong publicly declared the end of the war. Standing in front of Nigerian military officials, he said, "I am here to declare that we are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept the authority of the federal government." It was not just a military surrender. It was a symbolic collapse of a dream. General Yakubu Gowon, in a calculated move to foster unity, declared, "No victor, no vanquished." It was a message of reconciliation, but beneath the surface, mistrust and resentment brewed. The federal government launched a policy of 3 rupees: rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation. But for many, rebuilding was slow, and scars remained invisible yet deep. The toll was staggering. Over 1 million Biafrans perished, most from starvation and disease. Relief organizations had struggled to enter. Images of skeletal children shocked the world and redefined humanitarian response in conflicts. Though the war ended, its consequences echoed for decades. The Igbo people felt betrayed, alienated, and left to pick up shattered lives. Many migrated, seeking new beginnings in other regions of Nigeria or abroad. Some kept silent, others wrote books. A new generation grew up with whispers of the war, hearing tales of valor, horror, and lost hope. Today, the Biafran War is still debated, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly. The Biafran flag appears in protests. Some call for secession once more, others call for healing. But one truth remains: Biafra was not just a war. It was a cry for identity, justice, and survival. Biafra fell, but what it stood for still breathes in the hearts of many. Was it a mistake, or a prophecy yet to be fulfilled?